Welcome everybody to the B2C2 workshop, the first one, the inaugural workshop, which is about the feasibility of expansion projects. We have two speakers today, Jill Wickens and Kim Hiscott. I wanted to thank both of them for coming to speak with us, and thank you all for coming to the workshop today. I am going to make myself invisible and let Kim and Jill take over and start their workshop. Please, before I go, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. And also, we are going to have a poll, and when you see the poll pop up, please answer it. It'd be great to find out how people are thinking about this. So let's get started.
Great. Thank you very much, Tara. That's wonderful. And hello, everyone. As Tara said, my name is Kim Hiscott. I am coming to you from Ottawa. I am the Executive Director of Andrew Fleck Children's Services, and then a board member of Building Blocks for Childcare, B2C2. Really excited to have this conversation. We have lots of thoughts and ideas to share, but we're really hoping, Jill and I are both really hoping that this will be an engaging opportunity. We want to hear from you, to hear what you're thinking, what you're paying attention to, what might be causing you pause, and what other information that you would need from us in order to feel that you can expand not-for-profit licensed childcare in this brave new world of Canada-wide early learning and childcare. So first poll is up. Thank you, Tara. So we're really curious to know how many people are looking to expand. Are you thinking you're going to do this in the next 6 months, next 3 years? Maybe you're just starting to think about it. You're really not sure. Maybe you're on just a total maybe, or maybe you're on a no and hoping that today might change your mind. So please click on the poll and we'll get a sense of where people are feeling today. And Tara will tell us when she gets some answers, and we can start to move on.
Okay. So we have 3 people saying that they are planning on doing it in the next 6 months. 3 people who are planning out in the next 3 years. Nobody who's just thinking about it. 1 person who's maybe, and 1 person who's a no.
There we go. That's great. Okay, so a nice diverse audience. That's wonderful. And as Tara said, please put your questions in the chat, because then we can make sure that we're answering it. Anything that you're thinking of, or even if you just have a general comment, and we can make this as engaging as possible. So what we thought we would talk again today about is determining the feasibility of your expansion project and writing a plan to achieve it. So what are the the very first steps? And this is very preliminary. We know that it's we're not going to be able to in an hour give you everything, but what do you need to start? How do you sort of step into this? What is going to maybe make a difference as you're having your conversations with your board? So, oops, I went too far. Okay, so the very first piece is just feasibility. I'm sure many of you have been thinking about this. You probably have a waiting list or anticipating a waiting list, again, as we're looking at more affordable childcare. What you need to start with right away is figuring out, well, what is going to be feasible? What's your plan? What is your intention? Who do you want to support? Do you have a location in mind? Oh, I'm sorry, I'll just take that up. So how big of a center makes sense for you? Do you have an idea of what size, because size does matter? What is a viable location, a viable size for you? For some centers, for some agencies, it might be, the classic 15 toddlers and 24 preschoolers, so that 31. Others, it's the 39, I should say. Others, it's the 49 with an infant program included. Some it might be the 15 and the 16, depending again on what your community would need. And then for others, it might be as big as 88 or even larger, depending again on what you think your community is going to need. And so again, what kind of ages is infants a really high need of programming in your community, but or maybe it's toddler, preschool, kinder, and maybe even school age for that matter, even though school age aren't part of CWELC. Very, very important to really purposely plan for the outdoor space as well, making sure that that's something we don't minimize, that we make sure that we have really effective play on the land for children, and that we think about it as a bit more expansive perhaps than what's the minimum standards are in the Child Care and Early Years Act. And that's what, for us at Andrew Fleck Children's Services, we really pay attention to also the size. We're going to have a conversation about size and the calculator, but also thinking about what kind of space, physical space, and what's happening around when you're thinking about in terms of your community. Are you on close to a busy road? Is it accessible by bus? How are families going to get to you? What would the parking situation look like? Or can families walk? Are the neighbors going to be excited to have you present? Or might there be some questions or some concerns? And then, of course, you're going to start to think about location. Is there an existing location that you can add on to that maybe makes a lot of sense for you to put an addition? Or is there a prospective location, maybe some spaces that are underutilized in your community, or maybe there's a piece of land that would allow you to build something brand new? And then that age-old question: lease, own, rent, work with a developer. Are you thinking that this is going to be something that's, what is going to be feasible? What makes the most sense? How are you going to get this space opened for children? And of course, if it's going to be about a lease or an owning, we are going to talk about budgets a little bit. Will the costs be reasonable? And accommodation costs, we know, can be quite a bit of your budget. So how do we make sure that they are reasonable? What would be some of the questions you'd be wanting to ask? So I will pause there and let Jill go to the next. There we go, Jill.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to this opportunity. As Kim mentioned, I am also supporting this conversation today and very excited about that. I come from Compass Early Learning and Care, which admin center is located in Peterborough, but we are in 4 different municipalities throughout the city and county of Peterborough, Northumberland, Haliburton, City of Kawartha Lakes, and Durham region. And I come today with experience, but not as an expert. So I'm coming with some ideas and thoughts and other ways of thinking about moving forward with expansion. We have 40 programs that are licensed and 2 early on programs currently. And some of them we have been asked to support, and others have been invited to support. So, and some we've started from the bottom. And so I'm just going to jump right in and follow along with Kim in around the space calculation. And I put a resource at the very bottom, or the B2C2 has on their website is quite robust and is very helpful. I did play with it a little bit because it was the first time I'd looked at it, but it also one of the things that we also can think about when we're building a budget and we see a space, we see a dream, we have this idea that this community could support a childcare program. So we look at these as minimum requirements, and that they're not they just meet a minimum requirement, sorry. And do we want more than that? And how will we create spaces that align with our values and our beliefs and provide children with safe, joyful, caring places that will grow and evolve with them? Because as we know, and we can plan for them, we're just in the middle of doing revised budgets currently. And we think about all those infants have now turned to toddlers. And so, but there's nowhere to move them on. So how does your space then come into a toddler room, and how can it support that ages and stages of children? So just as you're beginning to look at space, think about those considerations. And then there's just so many, Kim and I were talking just before, there's all of those unforeseen, unplanned additions to budgets that pop up each year that you may not have thought of. So it's an ever evolving fluid budget is kind of what you need to have, is something that's really flexible and that you have a robust contingency or capital set aside for those unforeseen types of things. So when we were looking at it, we start with, how many spaces do you want for children? How many space do you, like Kim said, what age group are you going to be focusing on? And then what are the spaces that are appropriate for those age groups? And then there are outdoor spaces that go with them. Can the playground be off the classroom, or is that impossible? I love what Kim said around planning purposely for the use of the land, and how can we bring that into when we're planning. So these are all things that you need to start writing down and dreaming about and putting together some kind of description of what great would look like for those spaces. And then you need to, do you also need to look at support rooms for staff? Staff rooms are required, kitchen, of course, and reflective places for time for documentation. An organized, clean maintenance rooms, always helpful to keep your spaces clean and organized. Laundry, other types of spaces that would provide all of those types of environments that we want and hope for children and our educators. And then you have to think about the number of educators that you will need to support the children that you will be supporting. So if 3 infant staff, you need for 10 infant children. Same with your toddlers, preschoolers, and school age. The other thing that we often think about is, will there be a smaller program? Will this be a smaller program? Maybe it's a rural program, but this community really has identified a need and you really have a desire to support them. Is there an urban program that can help you offset some of those costs? Or could they support through additional time with financial assistance or a shared pedagogical lead, things like that? And then again, as Kim mentioned too, the outdoor spaces, what does that look like? How can you consider that? What other things can you consider to build those spaces together? Because we want them to be rich with materials and rich with opportunities. So how else can we consider that? Yeah, I think, Kim, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
I will add a couple of pieces. That was great, Jill. Has a really good overview. We've had the opportunity during COVID actually to build a couple of buildings, and we've done this previously as well. But what was really exciting for us was we were able to start 2 of the buildings. We were able to start with kind of vacant land, and then have a concept of what did we want this to look like, which is a really beautiful experience as an early childhood educator when you can start with a blank slate. Often we're kind of confined, right, to the existing walls, and then we kind of make do. So if you are embarking on that path as an opportunity, I would recommend actually having some really good conversations initially with your early childhood educators. The ideas that we gained from the ECs, who are the ones working directly with the children in ratio, really helped to make sure that the spaces were designed to enable the success of them and the children. And sometimes it's just simple little things that might seem really luxurious actually, but at the end of the day, they make a big difference, and then they add to sort of the long-term viability of the program. So for example, we added washers and dryers in each of our infant, toddler, and preschool rooms. A small little closet off the washroom, but then it enabled us to easily use real cloths at lunch, because now the educators could throw in a load of laundry and encourage the children to participate with them as they're doing that. It doesn't become something that you need to step out of the room or a significant burden. We also started having conversations with what other populations might we be interested in seeing visit the space, and could there be opportunities for there to be some collaboration. So we have started some intergenerational programs, and for those sites, we've wanted the spaces, the interior spaces, to actually be a little bit oversized, so we can accommodate maybe mobility aids, or to have an extra room where the children and the we call them grand friends can be spending time together, but the children who don't want to participate have their license space, but also allowing there to be then this kind of overflow space for additional pieces. Maybe not every space does need to be licensed, or doesn't have to be calculated as part of your license capacity, and that might even include being able to share things like the kitchen or things like that with other groups, depending on where you're co-located, and is that feasible. It might not be feasible in every space, and of course it brings up all kinds of questions from public health, etc., but it's ideas worth exploring. We also had conversations with people who do the cleaning, because sometimes, the materials that we choose, they might look stunning and be beautiful, but oh my goodness, they're very hard to maintain, and then that becomes a burden, right? And then we also made a choice to invest. So again, we're thinking in terms of considerations, we chose to invest in materials that would be really, really long lasting, in part because we know the the use ends up wearing our surfaces really quickly. We all learned that during COVID, in particular when we need to do lots and lots of disinfecting. But also we want to make sure that we're not contributing unnecessarily to landfill or a disposable approach. We wanted to see, well, what kinds of materials could we choose in terms of flooring and furnishings that will be still looking great in 20 years. The cubbies, those kinds of areas that tend to take a lot of wear and tear. Did that provoke anything for you, Jill, that you want to add before I move to the next slide?
No, I think that's great. Thank you. Thank you for adding that. And I've reflected a little bit of that in the budget considerations. So it moves perfectly into that.
Oh, that's great. Okay. Well, so the next question is about, is your board supportive? And the next piece we want to talk about. And this is pretty key, isn't it? Sometimes, your boards can, depending on their structure, they might want you as the director, executive director, to be focused on the program that exists, not thinking about expanding or the waiting list. There's lots of questions that they could be asking around finances, and what is the challenge? How could this actually affect the operations, the current operations, and its viability if you are to expand? So you really do need to have your board on side. You need to help the board to understand what would be the pros and cons, what are the opportunities that are created by expansion, how it supports not just the new program and the new families that have not yet joined your agency, but how it continues to support the existing program. And some of those, are somewhat obvious in a way, right? If you have more than one location. Again, Jill and I are both organizations that are a little bit larger, but you do create economies of scale, and there are efficiencies that are created, and often there's opportunities that are more present because you have the economic support that of being a larger agency, or what that brings. It also often creates a larger voice as well. So if Jill and her agency are pondering the impact perhaps of a recent provincial or CMSM policy, and when she goes to speak about it, and there's, well, this is going to affect 40 centers and however many spaces that translates into, it's going to make a difference, right? In terms of the messaging, versus if you're one program of 49 children, for example. So, it does create a bigger voice, and so then you can have more influence. But of course, boards are appropriately quite risk adverse. And so when will start having some detailed conversations about budgets, but this is the part that can be quite worrisome for boards, where, well, what if, and they'll bring up all the what if challenges and problems and consequences. And this is where we know that we need to be advocating as a sector to support the not-for-profits to expand, that some of these risks do have to be mitigated. We can't be can't be thinking that it's only on that small organization. But this is the time, isn't it? Because we do have big waiting lists, and we do know that families need care. So this is actually a time where we could probably plant our feet and be a little bit more purposeful in those conversations, again with our CMSM, and then ultimately with the province and the federal government, and saying, if you want us to expand, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to support us. We're here to do this, but we can't do it on unlimited with limited support. We need to have some confidence and security that we will be viable at the end of all this. I'll stop there. Jill, did you want to add anything about boards?
No, I loved your comment around the risk and how to move through those risks and make sure that you're financially viable still at the end of the day, right? So really important.
Great. All right. So I'll share this next slide. You get to talk about budget.
Yes, so exciting conversations these are. And one of the things that we try to do as an organization is create budgets that align with our values and visions and still have financial viability, as we were just sort of speaking to. So what does that mean? What are the risks, and how can you mitigate the risks? What else can we think about in that? And how can we is often a term that we tend to use in our organization anyway, that sort of helps us to think past just the risks and come up more with some solutions on how to move into them. We've opened up a few smaller rural type programs that started out with 2 and 3 children, and 4 years later they're now full and robust, and the community is just so very excited that they have a licensed childcare opportunity within their own communities without having to leave their community and move to another location. And it's, again, COVID has also supported that in creating those wait lists, as Kim mentioned, that have helped to build those up. And so we held on to that program probably for 5 to 10 years and reached out to our community partner and CSMs to help us think about how can we reduce the cost for families. And then CWELC arrived. So now the costs are affordable in those rural communities, and we now have long, lovely waiting lists where we want to think about how we can create more spaces now. So. And I love what Kim was saying earlier, when we're considering budgets, who do we need to collaborate with to move that, to ensure that you're getting the funding that is needed to build that dream and help it to come to fruition. The other part that Kim also mentioned is educators are vitally important in budgets creation and telling us and letting us know what they want and how they want to live in those spaces, what will fill them up and what will help the children to be successful as well. And how do you create those sense of belonging and that sense of welcome on those first days? And when we think about creating a budget and a business plan, we also allow in there for the thinking time, the training time, the time to be together and to build a team, to build a community prior to the children coming in. So how do you do that and create a budget that's financially viable and sustainable moving forward? As Kim mentioned too, the spaces that we dream of in as we're creating these floor plans, what does that look like? We've recently opened up a program right here at our central office, and it's attached to the admin area, and it has Feasibility built into it. We're in a community that is diverse. It's in a housing building, and it's offered us lots of different ways of thinking, but we've also included in the build some observation rooms so that people can come in and watch and see and hopefully do some dreaming and planning of their own. These rooms also support arteliers so that they can set up invitations such as shadows and lights. They can do arts and loose parts and invitations in those little rooms. So there are additional spaces, and we're lucky enough, this building was built as an accessible building. So we are also included in the other part of this building is an intergenerational opportunities there where people are coming from housing, low-income senior housing. And so how can we include them into our programs? How do you budget for that? And how do you create that opportunities for time to have staff to go over there and introduce themselves and introduce the children and invite them into our spaces? So when we're thinking about startup budgets, we try to include some of those items in there that can be amortized over time too, so that you can create a longer term 3-year budget or 5-year budget, depending on where it is. And then things like the kitchen, laundry, playground can have bigger ticket items in them. And can you then spread those out over a period of time so that it's not so much stress on the beginning, and create those capital expenditures that just pop up, or create opportunities to have those dollars for those pop-ups. And can you be intentional, like Kim said about our purchasing? You're so right, Kim. Through COVID, we learned what products were going to last and what products were not going to withstand all of the disinfectants and the washing and the cleaning. And so we have too leaned into the idea of purchasing quality, endless opportunities, equipment and toys, so that we can have them for years to come. And are there other items, like, so that if there are items that are not, within your reach, are there other grants or other community supports? We recently had, our playground was one where we went to families, they wanted the playground structure out of the playground. And so a family really wanted it. So we bartered for that. We said, okay, if you can have the playground, then can you help us find some materials and build some planter boxes and some paths and things like that? And that worked out really well. They went to community supports like Home Depot and some smaller construction companies and got some of those things. And the playground is just gorgeous and the children love it. And then the other consideration that was sort of mentioned to me was CWELC is offering each individual community, I understand is a little different, but ours is working on enrollment based. So that gives us a little bit of funding to work with too, because enrollment goes up and down, but operations budgets and capacity is different as well. So yeah, there's just a few in there. There's so many different types. I was saying to Kim before, a template for a budget would be a great thing to have on the B2C2 website. However, she's absolutely right when she said that it's so complex and there's so many things that pop up. But if you plan for the what ifs and the dreams, we've been successful anyway in being able to bring those dreams mostly to life. Yeah.
That's great, Jill. Thank you. That was wonderful. Yeah, we do want to actually at B2C2 to come up with a budget template, as Jill mentioned. And we are going to work on that, something that will be relatively easy for people to populate, to give a bit of an idea. But knowing that the world today is maybe different, and then we have to also do some predicting, so that as Jill was saying, like the long range planning for your budget becomes really, really important, and particularly as we don't know what how the CWELC funding will roll out, but will we, after we get our anchored budgets in 2024 perhaps, with the funding formula, we're not sure yet, but that's the plan. Will then it just be cost of living each year afterwards? And if that's the case, how do we make sure that we haven't unintentionally minimized a cost that then has a big impact, because we won't have the means to be able to manage that, right? If for example, cost of living is 2%, but our occupancy lease goes up by 4%, uh-oh, where are you going to find that additional 2%? You don't want to have that impact negatively on your supply budget, that kind of thing. So I'm going to talk next about strategic, oops, I went the wrong way, my apologies. I'm going to talk next about strategic plan. So do you already have a strategic plan? Presumably you do, and maybe it needs a refresh, or maybe this is a new concept that you're going to be introducing to your board. But for sure, you do want to have a good sense of where you're going. Where is your organization plan to go in the next 3 to 5 years? And there's lots of really good examples of organizations that have strategic plans. You can check on people's websites. Ours is posted there. I suspect Compass has theirs on their website. Jill's saying yes. So you can check for examples. But what's really key is to do that very important background preliminary work with your board and those in your agency to make sure that everyone's voice is heard. So if you have a strategic plan that doesn't need a refresh, that's great. Congratulations. Maybe it's already on the radar for your board. It's already part of your intention to expand. But if you don't, then you probably want to start by doing a landscape review. So what is happening around you? What are some of the impacts? Again, funding impacts, different layers of government impacts, what's the population impacts around, what are some of the stats, is your population expected to grow, your population of children expected to grow, or is it expected to decrease? Why would you be wanting to think about expansion? Then you also want to think about having the conversations with not only with your board, but with your whole team to talk about, well, what is their vision? If you were given that magic wand or that crystal ball, that opportunity to think about what would you want your agency to look like in 5 years? There's always the what's not working and what are some of the barriers, but just put those all aside and instead think about, if we could actually dream what we really want to see happen, what would that look like? And sometimes you have to look at the forest and sometimes you have to look at the trees. But what you're trying to encourage people in the strategic plan piece is to look at the forest. Let's not get bogged down to, but how would we do that piece? That's for the beginning, like, let's just take a look at that forest and figure it out. Then and by engaging all of your team and the board, you'll find that you're starting to land on what kind of is your priorities, where your energies are going to go, what makes the most sense. I have found it really helpful with our board to be able to tell it as a story. So frame it from the experience of the child or the experience of the family, so that they can see how your different services or how your one service is going to impact. And then perhaps also tell it from the story of you as an employer, because you have that dual role, right? So you want to absolutely serve and support children and families, but also what kind of employer are you going to be? Because if you're not an effective employer, then you're not going to be able to serve and support children and families. So telling the story perhaps for 5 years out, well, what is your agency going to look like? What are you going to focus on? Keeping it kind of grounded into something relatable can really be, again, impactful for your board as they're trying to decide what the priorities are going to be. In terms of getting some of this work done, because I know that can be overwhelming, for us preparing for when we needed to do our strategic plans, we start a good 8 months before the actual time when we're going to have this session. There's multiple little touch points that are happening to get to that point. We do engage a facilitator, and I would strongly encourage you to have an outside facilitator. It is a lot of work to try to gather all the background material on your own. We've also used, and very effectively, some of the students from the local college when they've been on placements to gather up again some of the background materials, so that so again, your board and the team are feeling like they have all the details that they need. They're not going off down the path of, but I don't know, are we do we need to grow? Like, what's our population? Like, you want them to have that data right at their fingertips. So having the facilitator is really important. And then we tend to also do our SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis, separate from our actual strategic planning day. So again, that's the chance for people to get out all of their what if pieces and their risk pieces and all their anxiousness. So we would do that, maybe a month before. And so people can do that kind of brainstorming, which is important. But then afterwards, they have a bit more grounding and opportunity, a bit more space to be able to do the visioning piece, because they've already had a chance to talk about the threats, because those tend to, be, and the weaknesses, right? Those tend to be what, and appropriately so, again, because they're concerned about risk, where boards can get a bit stuck. So if they've been able to take that off the table, if they've already had that conversation, and then you separate out to say, okay, so where are we going to go? I find that the conversation a little bit richer, a little bit more purposeful, and we land on a place that's feels really quite comfortable. So hopefully that helps. So having a strategic plan, though, I have had some people say to me, well, do we need one? We're a pretty small organization. Absolutely, 100%. You absolutely do need a strategic direction. And you need it actually as the leader of the organization, much more even than the board. You need it because that gives you that grounding, that purpose, that intentionality, because we're often pulled in multiple different directions or invited to participate in different things. And then by having that strategic vision, that plan from your board, then where you're going to spend your energy. You're not then inadvertently a bit scattered, right? It gives you that grounding. Or if you have a board member saying, oh, I'm not sure, if we should be focused on this, you can say, well, actually, it is in our strategic plan. This opportunity's come up and it's in our strategic plan. So, obviously boards can change their strategic plan, but it does give you a little bit of something to point to when there's questions. So as I said, it grounds you as the leader of the organization. Jill, anything to add to that?
No, I just totally support that idea of a strategic plans really grounds you in where to move and helps the board to really think about what else they can do within our communities to move forward expansion. And we do too have a strategic plan, and we're right in the middle of revising it right now. And what does that look like? And we've had shared services and expansion on our plan, and we're just looking at ways to strengthen that too.
Excellent. Great. All right, Jill, take us to what's next.
Yeah, I'm thinking about so many different things at this point, and this slide doesn't even begin to share some of the next steps, but there's just so much dreaming and envisioning to do. Again, if you haven't got a strategic plan, that will really help you ground you in what to do next and how to move forward with that. So I encourage you to do that. Even if it isn't a full-on strategic plan, just something that would ground you in how you would move forward, the why you want to move forward, who you will be supporting, and how you would do that. And then again, there's just so many other pieces to it as you think about, do you just think dreaming, if I get an opportunity, this is what I want to do. So you have it ready to go when those opportunities pop up. Who else can you talk to in those communities to think about planning, fire, health, an architect, ministry approvals? What are those CSM approvals? Now we have to have CMSM approvals as well. And so what does that look like? How do we begin to build a community? How do we begin to build relationships with those people that will also support us in helping and supporting families as they move into licensed childcare that maybe some of them have not had the opportunity of enjoying? And then how would you identify the needs in a community? What does that look like? And I wrote down, impact in our areas and our populations. And how do you research that? Because our census information is usually 2 years old by the time we get it. And is it really what's happening in our communities? I live in a community that when the census was done, since then, there's 750 new homes. So that doesn't really give you an idea of what those families need. And now they're really struggling to find childcare because we couldn't and did not build enough spaces for licensed childcare. And so we are now really researching some spaces that we can use to support that, to move it forward. And who else can we lean on in our communities to grow that? Is there a real estate agent that can help us search for land? Is there a community partner? Is our municipality, are they looking at Parks and Rec? Are there something in there that we can lean to build a partnership? And so there's all these other little nuances on how to move forward, even just to know what does the fire department look for? What does a health department look for? What kinds of things does an architect need, so that you're not scrambling. That's what I've learned over the time, is that if I have a list of things I need to do and people I need to think about, I'm prepared moving forward. I don't have to then start digging deep just to figure out where do I begin. So I would encourage everyone just to start dreaming, thinking, and believing that this can happen. What do we want for children and families in our communities? Kim, do you have anything to add to that?
Excellent. No, that was great. Yeah, it is that that partnership piece that I think is going to be really inspiring for expansion and create opportunities. Those non-traditional partners, maybe that as you listed, that we had maybe not thought of before. Even wherever there's additional spaces already being created, where could children be co-located? We have an approach here at Andrew Fleck Children's Services where children should be seen and heard is kind of our motto, where we want to see children part of neighborhoods, and whether that's attached to childcare, attached to long-term care, or attached to housing, we don't need to be standalone. And so what opportunities does that create where we can really see children in their neighborhoods, changing the landscape of a neighborhood in a really positive way.
And Kim, I'd just like to add to that would be a great thing to include in your strategic plan, because we really want to hear the voices of children, whether they're outside in the playground or whether it's something that they need within their community. And so it's really important that we too have a childcare program that was small, and we expanded it in 2020. And so it's now larger, and it's created some great conversations with neighbors around what does noise mean? What does joy sound like? How can we live together? What tools or things do we need to put in place? How do we invite the neighbors in? So that they're seeing the joyful places that children are playing in. So yes, that does. I love that saying, seen and heard.
Seen and heard. Okay, I'm gonna we've managed our time really well. I'm so impressed by us. I'm gonna stop the share, and this is an opportunity for people to ask questions. I haven't seen anything in the chat, but we'll see if there's questions. People can just put their hand up and maybe or mute themselves or put a question in the chat, and let us know what you're thinking, if this was helpful, if you have more questions, what are your missing details perhaps, or what's your story.
Sometimes the stories that we share are where the most lessons are learned. So ask questions, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
What are you thinking about?
One thing I can share, that's been a part of our experience that's been interesting, is that because we did identify that we were interested in expansion initially as part of our strategic plan. It's actually been a part of now 2 or 3 strategic plans. It's actually created opportunities where we now have people contacting us. So developers, for example, or people that are creating new communities, they're contacting us and saying, oh, well, what would you think about being able to co-locate children here? And I will admit that sometimes the first conversations are probably you know, a little self-centered on their part, right? They're calling, saying, thinking that, well, we'd be a secure tenant or whatever. But we've been able to then articulate, well, this would mean this, and we would expect this, and we won't be relegated to the back of the space, and we, you know, our yard space would need to be this, and but this is what we'll bring to the community, and this is the energy and the positiveness. And so we, you know, we found that those conversations have been really fruitful, because not only have we are we able to then think about children and their spaces, you know, in a really positive way, but I'm hoping that we're also changing how people think about children and spaces too. Oh.
And that also kind of leans into helping our funders and government officials understand the value of childcare a little more too, having that opportunity to voice.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I like this question. So what do we wish that we had planned for? Well, we have one space right now, one building that's underway, that we didn't plan for the lengthy construction delays. So that's been one challenge. I think COVID has just put everything. It's confused everything. So the planning things take a lot longer than you expect. Um, that so I wish we'd planned for that. And interestingly, I think one of the mistakes we made was that we started to promote that program a little bit too early, and so we've disappointed a lot of families because it wasn't ready when they needed care, and so that's felt really yucky. I will say. So I wish we had delayed, and that happened actually in 2 of our builds, but that was COVID. Yeah, I think I now know more. I think I wish I had had more understanding of, this is from a previous project, about HVAC and heating systems. Um, and so now I know, uh, but how important it is to pay attention to those things, right? Inevitably, you get one side of the building is really hot and another side of the building is cold, and you know the toddlers are running around and they're generating all kinds of heat, and then the infant room maybe is feeling a little bit cooler, and so how do you make sure that everybody gets the comfortable temperature that they deserve? So so those are the good questions to kind of ask, and that's where bringing in the educators and getting them to think, okay, again, like what are some of the things that you really love about the spaces you've worked in the past, and what are some of the things that just didn't work for you, and then adding those to your wish list, I think is really important. Mm-hmm.
For me, for our organization, I would say a bigger dream around playground spaces and outdoor areas and playing on the land, as Kim had said, and making sure that you're very clear with your builder or your community partner that you're building with, that these are important spaces and they can't be taken back. And so, and writing those right in the agreement, because ours, we didn't pay enough attention to it because we made some assumptions that they understood, and our spaces are a little less than what we'd hoped, but we are very fortunate that we have a huge park across the road, and so we can then think about how we can use those spaces to the max. So yeah, that's a big one. The other one in our expansion in COVID through COVID was the same as Kim, the delay. And luckily we had a school partner that was very flexible in allowing us to be able to support the families during that. It wasn't a new build, so we were just moving children and the spaces were bigger. So we were able to take in a few other children that were really desperate and couldn't wait. So that was really helpful too. So if you do have to do a move, try to look at your space that you're moving to temporarily to support the families that you currently have and any additional families until you can move back into the space. But plan for delays. I think that is the biggest thing, even through other builds that wasn't through COVID or weren't through COVID, sorry. They were still big delays. School boards were at least 6 months delay for us in a community build with the school. So those are just part of of it. Now I'm finding, I say, don't promote, like Kim said, until you almost have that piece of paper of occupancy in your hand.
Oh, Karen, thank you for your question. Yeah, ton of reservations with the uncertainty of the CWELC funding. But at the same time, it's also this really exciting opportunity. I mean, it's once in a generation, amazing, affordability for families, and our waiting lists are out of control. So, and it's kind of a, but if we don't, who will kind of messaging, but also knowing that it takes a long time. So my advice, we have right now, for example, 6 what I call aspirational projects, kind of sitting there, ready. We're waiting for the, and I'm from the city of Ottawa, and so it was just released where there could be expansion spaces. It just the proposal, the request for expression of interest just got released, and we know the expansion spaces are really, really limited. And so we're going to trust. We're going to step out where we had hoped to expand, and we know that we don't have to make a commitment until we have the secured funding. So we're expecting that we know what we need in terms of costs of financing, in terms of construction and ongoing. We're going to have some more B2C2 webinars around that kind of stuff. But we feel if we don't identify that we're willing to look, then we won't be at the table to even have the conversation of how we can influence to look differently or to be feeling more secure. So it's feeling like we do need to do that. I personally, I don't think I'd be comfortable right now to expand outside of CWELC funding. We have been asked actually by one group where, would you want to just open and offer market? And, I guess that's an option. I'm not sure that I would feel great about that though, as an agency, because we have multiple sites. So having one site that needs to be at market and other sites that are at CWELC rates just feels uncomfortable. But maybe that's a strategy too, as a not-for-profit, to go forward if you're in a community where there would be high demand, while the CWELC catches up, because you could then demonstrate, oh, well, look, this program is absolutely necessary. We are full, and therefore seeing if CWELC could catch up. But it is tricky times for sure, but I do think we need to. So that's a long way to say concerns and reservations, absolutely paying attention, but still going to do it.
Leaving.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a question. Can I ask a question? I'm wondering, first of all, do we have, or can you two make, or can we make a really good checklist for some of these things? Or is that one of the ways that will make it easier for people? Because it does seem like an endless list of things you have to think about, and I don't know whether there's a way of doing that more simply. That was one question I had. But the second one is, I'm wondering if any of our guests feel comfortable telling us a bit about what they are thinking and what the difficulties are, or if they're a bit too shy, maybe, but we're pretty understanding crowd. So if you're at all interested, we'd love to hear what you're thinking.
I can start while people are pondering, if they're willing to share. The checklist piece, absolutely. So that is the project that we're working on, with a bit of funding, fortunately, from the McConnell Foundation. I think I can let that out of the bag.
Yeah.
And we are looking at a resource kit, which will have all of those details in it, that are, what are the steps? What do you need to be paying attention to? What are so different checklists? We'll be releasing sections as they're developed. So pay attention to the B2C2 website, and you'll start to see those sections being released fairly shortly over the next year. But they'll have, yes, hopefully a lot of those details. A real how-to manual is what we're hoping to create. Anybody want to tell us their story, to share what they're thinking?
Hello
And I-
there. So if I get your question right, like, are you asking how the expansion plan is going, or what in terms of that?
Yes. So what are you thinking? Are you ready? Are you excited? What do you need to know? Yes.
So I'm currently like running a center for an organization and in the middle of an expansion as well. And this was my first time. So yes, it was very intimidating for me because I was kind of taking this step on my own, and a lot of learning throughout the process, because now I'm from Waterloo region in Ontario. So the process is, I heard, is kind of different now, because now the ministry is expecting you to take all the approvals and then upload them, and then they will give you hopefully your license. So it is a lengthy process for sure, from beginning till the end. I'm hoping I'm towards the end from my end. And as you said, you have to expect the delays when you're keeping the timelines in mind, and that's because of COVID and all the delays with constructions and all that. Even though I didn't have to go through a lot of construction, because it is a running center and we already had an extra classroom. We just did the internal construction to make it into another classroom. But for example, finding a person to give you a building approval was very hard. I've been looking for someone since December, and finally I did it today. I had somebody today come in. And then fire approval. I had somebody who came and did the inspection, but they started looking at the entire building, not only the room. And because it's an old building, found some of the things that I was just focused on my classroom, didn't know that they would go through every single little detail of the building. It's like 100+ year old building. Obviously it's not going to be in perfect conditions. It's a school as well. So that is something I'm really concerned about, because I'm not sure when and how we are going to complete the list of things that he has mentioned in his inspection, and I can't get a license until those things are done. So that's really concerning, because everything else is done. Like we have spent all our money, what we have received from the grant for the expansion, and now it's just this one approval that's remaining. And the amount of things he has mentioned, the officer is like, it's gonna cost so much that the money we don't even have to do all that renovation. So like at the end of the day, the reason why I took this step is, again, because since Seawalk started, the need for childcare has become like much more. Like I have now parents who come literally on a daily basis in my office fighting with me, why you're not giving us a spot. Before it would be just emails and calls, but now it's like people actually coming in person and wondering why we can't have more than 24 kids in one room. Like, what's a big deal? So it's only for the community that we are doing. I wish, I really like this workshop. Like, you guys were amazing. I was
wondering how can I, record this and keep every word that you're saying. So I'm happy that Susan said that there should be a checklist, because it's a very important process and not easy. So it would be helpful for people who are trying to start somewhere and have some sort of guideline to follow through, because I had to research on my own, with the help of some colleagues and people in the community. So when they decided to decrease the amount for fee, they should have thought about spaces. I don't know if they did or not, because obviously, if you're gonna say,
Good point.
yeah, there's a sale going on, who will be the one saying, I'm not gonna take this opportunity, right? So now there's like, everybody wants to be in childcare, but where are the spaces? And where are the resources to all of us increase those spaces? Like if centers are doing taking that step on their own, is their own personal choice, right? Thinking about their community, thinking about their own organization. But I think, like, regional wise, like, there should have been some sort of plan that was given to the centers prior to announcing to the whole public, here you go, we have now childcare 50%, and also I from our region, I read in one of the memo that now that if we increase the spaces, they're going to determine on whether a family is actually going to get that 50% discount or not. Like, it's not going to be everybody, which I don't like. I hope I'm wrong in that, but I feel like that's going to be very challenging for centers, because now you have one room that is fully covered, and then you open another classroom. Now this one is not covered, and only few people who cannot afford fully will be given C-Walk, and the rest are not. Like, how are you going to explain this to general public? Like, not sure how it's gonna be, but I hope this is a little bit helpful, Susan. As I said, this was my first time, so it is an exciting process, but very lengthy process, very time consuming, and like, you learn a lot throughout this journey of expansion. Like, I feel like it's a dream now, since what happened with my fire inspection, that I don't know if I'll be able to see one room with children, but I'm working towards it. I wanted to actually ask you guys one thing. Like, when I think about, like, this is about expansion, but whenever I think about, like, it's a dream for me to open my own center one day, right? I always get stuck with the finances. Like, when you're opening your own center, whether it's nonprofit or however it is, like, are you supposed to come up with your own funding?
Good question. Yeah, good question. So as a not-for-profit, I mean, you wouldn't have the funding, right, as a not-for-profit necessarily, unless you had reserves. So unless you were not-for-profit that was existing, that already had some reserves that they could invest. So then, as a not-for-profit, we still haven't felt that the province or the federal government has settled what would be happening around capital funding for expansion. At this point, the intention, there's a very small amount of grant money that's really going to cover the materials, the furnishings, but the actual capital costs, either for a new construction or for leasehold improvements, would need to be financed. So as a not-for-profit, you would need to go to get a loan, which we know can be a little bit complicated sometimes as a not-for-profit. And then that cost should be covered under the C-Walk operating reimbursement. But that's still part of the unknown piece. This is all new, because in the past, not-for-profits were funded. There was a formula, a capital construction formula. Wasn't enough either, for sure. It was, but it was an amount per room. It was just over $500,000 per room. So things are different. So we don't know. We're still waiting for more word on that. Okay, I think we've come to the end of our time. Jill, did you have any just final words that you wanted to add before we?
I don't, I think you covered everything. I am not on top of all of the CWELC funding. I do know that we do have to think about quality over quantity, and that children deserve spaces that are welcoming, beautiful, inviting. And so how does that look, and how do we build those beautiful spaces? So that is something that our organization is thinking about. The one other piece that I did want to add, though, was sometimes there's shared services, or there's companies or programs that have some expertise or tools in their toolboxes that can help people move through some of those challenging times, like applications for expansion, working with community partners, fire, health, all of those kinds of things. So sometimes lean on some of your community partners to help you to move through that, because it can be very, very challenging, just like we heard.
So I just wanted to say thank you to Kim and Jill, and to the audience, especially those who ask questions. I love bravery. It's great. Don't forget that we have more workshops coming up. There's one on Friday, which you can sign up for if you haven't already. And then there are 5 more after that, coming up within the next month. So this is a big kickoff for a very intense period of workshops with lots of really interesting and I hope it will be helpful for people, helpful topics. So thank you very much, everyone, again, and we hope to see you soon.